We are live.
All right, welcome to the Camera Show, where we talk about all things cameras, film, and video. I'm Rowan Bradley, and with me is...
Mike Morris, how are you doing today?
I'm doing great, man. Had a little bit of an interesting experience trying to get out and film some more hiking videos this weekend. That was a little bit of a failure due to a combination of things, but other than that, doing awesome. How about you?
Well, still living the dream from the basement. Temperature is very variable. Today seems to be okay. My body's reacting very weird. Top is hot, bottom is cold. So yeah, I'm wearing t-shirt and winter Crocs for some reasons with high socks. But yeah, everything's fine. Other than that,
These are our quarantine dreams.
yeah, it
It's
is.
weird that we're already halfway through the year. I can't fathom.
It is July 1st today. Crazy.
Yeah, yeah, more than halfway. Well, let's jump into the episode. So as far as news topics today, you've got us started with a couple items here, starting with a Timecode Kickstarter.
Yeah,
Now yeah, go for it.
yeah. Have you seen that? That's pretty cool. I mean, it's timecode device, so it's pretty boring. But it's such a. I feel like. I mean, I don't know. Sometimes I dream about timecode. I don't own anything to manage timecode, but I dream about it. Like the right click and everything it sync, especially when you work documentary and things like that, where it's all over the place. Anyway, long story short, this is Kickstarter for a new device that sync with satellite. So the idea is that you don't have to manage it with an app or anything. You turn it on and it's in sync. And the big pros of that is that no matter where you are in the world, it's gonna sync on the same in the same time. It's gonna be in sync. So like they were showing in their video, you could have, for example, an interview, even like a remote Skype interview with someone on the other side of the world, recording your own with a camera, like with you on our show, and then you go and post and right click it, it's in sync. And even like on a more often, it's gonna be like a couple cameras or a camera and a recorder. And same thing, like you don't have to know anything about it. You just plug it and it works. And even if it loses signal, it can keep, it stays accurate for, I think, 4 or 5 hours before needing to sync again. And it can work in remote areas, like everywhere, basically. So I thought it was pretty cool. And it's kind of like the same price than a Tentacle Sync or something like that. And it works both for like jamming timecode or to record on a audio track. So yeah, there you have it.
Yeah, no, this is really cool. I have to admit that I've always been kind of intimidated by time code because it just seemed like this kind of nebulous idea that
Same.
I frankly haven't had all that much experience with time code. I've more just synced up like the manual way when I've done multi-track, but
Same.
it is definitely frustrating and always wanted a solution. And this definitely seems like the most straightforward, and the fact that you don't have to jam them is incredible. Like,
Yeah,
again, not having had a ton of experience, but that seems like the main issue.
Yeah, I was gonna pull the trigger actually on a Tentacle Sync soon, well, before COVID. I
Yeah,
was gonna get two because sometimes it is nice to record audio on a separate recorder when you can. Because even in these cameras, like the knobs are like so small, it's so sensitive to the low levels. So it's convenient to record audio in cam, but I mean the cons are that it's hard to adjust volume properly and monitor it too. So yeah, I was
right.
gonna pull the trigger on Tentacle Sync, but that's even better because you don't even need to reset them or anything. There's one button, and it's plug and play. Love that.
Yeah, no, that's really cool. And definitely if I was looking to do time code, this would be such a easy, straightforward way to get started on it.
Yeah. Sounds sounds cool. I'll think about it. I haven't ordered anything, but no, right now it would not make sense anyway. Time code for what?
Yeah.
But but as soon as we get out on the field again, I'll think about it.
Yeah. Another one of yours, and this is something that you have a ton of experience with, which is the Sigma FP. They dropped a new firmware, and this is a big update.
It is. It was supposed to be the big update. So the camera, when first launched, had like a lot of glitch and little things that they promised that they would fix in the firmware 2.0. And they partially did. There is a few things that it's still not due. So, and will not. They said the main thing is it will never have a log profile. I don't know why, but they explained that it was just not possible. I think they are focusing on making a good RAW camera, period. Like, end of story. Take it or leave it kind of thing. I think they're really pushing, and it's a niche, but I think they're really pushing for being a director's viewfinder on all the big sets. And on that segment, it's still a very affordable solution. You can now take pictures while recording, while using the viewfinder. So for a director, it could be a very powerful tool and still pretty affordable. So it's something that the guy can own. And I don't know. I think it's great when you work on such great big projects like that. I think it's cool to have a small camera like that can record stuff, like serious stuff, and that you can play with when you're like in the pre-production phase and everything. I don't know. I can imagine. I still want one. The second big update is that it now externally record Blackmagic RAW and ProRes RAW. Why would you record ProRes RAW? I don't know. Why everybody is so excited about it? I don't get it. I feel very old. I feel like, when you find something cool with young people and you don't understand it, that's how I feel with ProRes RAW. I'm like, it's the same than ProRes. It doesn't do anything else. You can't correct color temperature or ISO in post. It's only now it works on Adobe softwares too, but for the longest time it was only on Final Cut Pro and Atomos Recorder. So outside of that, there's not much use. It's very similar to recording in ProRes 444, so it's just like a little bit more efficient. So I don't know. To me, it doesn't work in Resolve, so I'm not interested.
Yeah, I mean, Blackmagic RAW definitely gets me excited, and it's cool to see. I remember them mentioning that they would be allowing other companies to shoot in Blackmagic RAW.
Yeah.
And that was really exciting, and that's certainly from my experience, an awesome, fantastic codec to be using. ProRes RAW, I don't have a ton of experience with, but if you can't adjust those settings in post, I mean, if it's a more efficient codec than 444, then that's cool, but nothing to get too crazy hyped over.
Totally, and also if you can't, if it's not usable on every NLE, it's not even usable it's not usable in Avid. Nobody in the lower end, like we are, is using Avid, but I think it's a good sign that it's not going anywhere anytime soon, because if the main NLE in the industry is not supporting it, we will, kind of thing,
Right.
So yeah, Blackmagic RAW, like you, I love this codec. I think it's so good. It's the perfect balance between compression and enough collecting enough data to push it in post. What was I gonna say? Yeah, the only thing that I regret about these cameras is that it doesn't do it internally, because putting an external recorder on the Sigma FP kind of defy the purpose of the camera. On the other hand, I understand that the processing power is probably very limited because it's so small. Otherwise, it would like run probably into all sort of issues. I also don't know what kind of deal they have with Blackmagic to be able to use the codec on cameras. So maybe that's like using with their recorder is probably like the maximum they can do. And their recorder, as much as I love Blackmagic, their recorder sucks. I don't know if you ever had used the video assist. It's not great. I had the old version. You could only record on SD cards. Like go recording ProRes on SD cards, it's ridiculous. Now you have a USB to plug like an external SSD, but dude, like the setup, you have the camera, a cable to an external recorder, a cable to an external hard drive, and then what? Like it's a Christmas light. You can hang it, and well. Anyway.
And any camera changes that you're trying to do with that kind of setup just gets ridiculous. Yeah,
and all good reasons for it to go wrong too on the shoot.
Yep.
Like you had potential reason to go wrong. Anyway, other than that, you can shoot now the Cinemagraph, which don't know I would, but you can.
I mean, I've made some cinemagraphs from using random like using cameras before, and also using my phone, and they're really cool. I really wonder how good the software is going to be creating those on the fly, because technical challenge, which if it can do it in camera, all the better, and that's definitely a niche feature, but cool, I guess. But I also wonder if it's gonna like suck because it has to basically trace out an object and capture only that object's movement with it while holding everything else in place, and I just kind of doubt the processing power on a tiny camera to do that well.
Yeah, there's definitely a few challenges to make it right. They said they was gonna use CineDNG to do it, but CineDNG without the processing, the post processing is on this camera is really like the image out of the box that's not great. So the only reason to the only way to make it like a good image is to go in color grading. So I don't know on Cinegraph how you're gonna color grade that. I don't know. Well, we'll see.
Yeah. Well, good news, certainly good news for Sigma FP owners, and I am excited to see the camera getting more support over time and that kind of thing. I like the camera in theory, so I hope it does get better, and maybe the version FP2 or whatever could be a really usable camera and incorporate, all of these things, and hopefully a log profile or something like that, and just be a little bit more dynamic for more use cases, because they do seem to be super specific with this camera as it stands right now.
Yeah, I think the no log profile to me is not that big of a deal, but it would be more having a best option, like for RAW, having Blackmagic internally would be great, or having their all proprietary RAW with just having more options into the compression, just having like intermediate size files, because CineDNG is very beefy. So something like that, just having a little bit more flexibility on what the file size is going to be. The only thing that I really regret about this camera, but there's not much to do about it, is the choice of memory card. It's SD cards, and so you can only shoot because of it. You can only shoot CineDNG in HD, because otherwise the writing speed is too limited by the card. So I wish they would have done like if at least there was like a CFast card or XQD, and you could internally record 4K RAW. Even if it was CineDNG, it would already be better. But the fact that you have to rely on putting an external hard drive kind of like start to be that's where you would you wish you would have like a more compressed codec option to still record on a SD card when you want and to go external SSD when you can.
Yeah, for me, I would really start to consider this camera if it incorporated some amount of weather sealing. I have no idea if they would consider that, but for me, any cameras that I'm doing projects.
I think it's weather
yeah,
resistant.
Well then,
yeah, I'm not sure, but
yeah. If it had reliable weather resistance, obviously the Panasonic that I'm using right now is known for just being a sturdy camera that's not going to flake out on you in conditions. And then internal Blackmagic RAW, I would seriously consider switching to that because it is such a small, lightweight camera that for hiking stuff, for being outdoors, and for most of my work right now being on tripods. It's kind of the perfect camera in some ways. I think the limitations right now hold it back from making sense for me, but would definitely be interested in a full frame compact camera that has some powerful codecs to use.
Yeah.
And then it looks like Japan Camera Hunter started a YouTube channel. This is awesome. I've been following Japan Camera Hunter for a long time.
Yeah, same. And I never pulled the trigger, but I always wanted to order a camera from him. For the collection, but I just never did. So far, the cameras that I bought were not specially produced in Japan or didn't make sense. But that's cool. He made like little videos introducing models of the past that we might have forget. Like just an overall presentation. They are great. I already watched them all, and I want a new camera.
yeah, definitely recommended for anybody who is in the film camera world. And he definitely has some kind of collector's items. The Nikon SP, the Zeiss Icon, which I always coveted because I love a rangefinder, and this was kind of not the Leica M6 or M7. Yep. I guess M7 would be the most accurate, but some beautiful cameras, and he definitely has a lot of insider knowledge on using these.
Yeah, I made one about one of the Yashica twin lenses, and I have a similar version in gray. His is black. Just because it's black, I want it. I'm like, oh, it looks so nice in black. I want it. It's probably the exact same camera, but it's in black, so it looks cool.
No, they're beautiful cameras, and they're becoming more and more collector's items. Hopefully in use too. I mean, the Yashica makes beautiful photos. I've definitely seen a bunch of amazing film photos. It's like a Rolleiflex style twin lens medium format camera, but a little bit cheaper as far as I understand. Is that right?
Yeah, it is. And mainly I have a few Yashica. I had a few Yashica. I still have two, I think. I have a rangefinder and a twin lenses. And the main issues with these cameras, outside of the fact that they are a little plasticky, so you gotta treat them with like a lot of care, a lot of love. But the main issues is they all run with batteries usually, which it's not necessarily the case with like a Leica M or something, or like some old Canon you can just run, even if you don't have a light meter. Yeah.
Well, now I have more camera lust, and no film cameras right now. So, but I'll be checking this out for sure, and watching him play with all of his beautiful film cameras. Cool. Well, I just had one news item that I thought might be interesting to discuss here, and that is that Olympus is getting out of the camera business. Yep. Did you see this news? And have you ever shot with Olympus cameras before?
No, I only had two of their micro four third lenses when I had the GH5. It was actually it was the first lenses I got with the GH5. It was the wide zoom, and I forgot the numbers. The wide zoom and the 12-35, which is the medium zoom. And they were crap. The build quality of the lens were great. I loved the focusing ring. It had like the thing where you can pull it, and it's a focus ring with outstop. I love that, but the image quality was so soft. It was not great. How about you?
Yeah, similar experience. For digital cameras, I have not owned any Olympus cameras. I also use some of their Micro Four lens and found for Micro Four Thirds lenses, and found the exact same thing. I loved the build quality. They feel like an older style of lens that is more, it's definitely more friendly to manual use, and it's also built with more metal in general. So they have a really beautiful feel.
Yeah,
But
and
I
I
just
really
found
like
that
that.
the
I wish
yes,
they
I
were
did too.
looking. I wish they were looking as nice as they feel like.
And they don't, and that's the weird thing that I experience with them is you hold them and you think you should just be getting amazing image quality, but they don't hold a candle to the Leica Lumix lenses that are the main competitors, or even some of the cheaper Micro Four Thirds lenses by third parties like Laowa and that
Yeah,
kind of thing.
Voigtlander. Or,
Yeah, and I see this as kind of a little bit of an omen of the fact that the camera market in a lot of ways is shrinking. Certainly smartphones are putting a lot of pressure on camera manufacturers, and if you're not the Canons of the world, you know, Sony has had a lot of success recently, but camera companies are going to be forced to innovate or they're not going to be able to keep up. And I think the main problem with Olympus is they didn't have any one feature that was the best in class. I guess you could argue their IBIS was best in class, but that's not really a system seller. That's kind of a nice to have. And I don't really think they ruled the market in any other zone. Does anything come up for you when you're thinking about Olympus cameras as the best
not
in class
really.
for one thing or another?
Yeah, I heard recently then, and I forgot the name of the camera, but the equivalent of the one you have, the equivalent of the G9, I think. Their flagship Micro Four Thirds, I forgot the name. I think had like great autofocus and IBIS, better than, for what I heard, Panasonic, but I never tried them. I hope Pentax not gonna disappear because I have a soft heart for Pentax, and they're probably next on the list. But yeah, you're right. There is so much competition. On the other hand, I don't know. Samsung makes cameras. There's like some still like some
Yeah.
obscure brand that seem to sell somehow. But yeah, I guess they were. I don't know. Like all the people, I don't even know anybody that shoots Olympus. I don't know why, and I don't want to be insulting. But in my mind, Olympus make me feel like old people doing bird watching. I don't know why, but that's what I have in mind.
I mean,
I guess that's a niche. Maybe not big enough.
Yeah, I do think that they did go after kind of that crowd a little bit. It was definitely in their marketing of like, you know,
Right, it's not just
rugged
me,
bodies
right?
built
That's the
for
thing,
kind
right?
of.
Yeah.
No, that's definitely a thing. And I mean, I did use some of their film cameras. One of the first rangefinders that I had was a tiny little Olympus, and that thing was amazing. And I also had the Olympus OM2 for a little while, which is a SLR film camera, and that was great. And the cool thing with those cameras was that they had such incredible optics, which also made me really surprised when their Micro Four Thirds lenses weren't that good, or at least the ones that I tried weren't that good. But yeah, I also think this is kind of like doom for, or at least a challenging market for small sensor sizes. As things shift full frame, they didn't really have an answer, and you've seen Panasonic come out with full frame to complement their Micro Four Thirds. And certainly if Panasonic hadn't come out with something that is not just Micro Four Thirds to support their camera business, I can't imagine that they'd be staying in it. But they were able to kind of develop out of the corner of having just a small sensor size when we're seeing other camera companies innovate into, you know, being able to differentiate themselves further from a smartphone and this kind of image quality that you can expect from that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and they were also marketing-wise, they were liking a little bit of hype too. Because there is, I mean, on the major brands, there is a lot of crap. when you test the cameras and everything. But they sell because they have good marketing, and maybe they were lacking that
Yeah.
too. They were lacking a little bit of sexiness.
Definitely. Yeah, I never sensed that from Olympus. You've seen Fuji do a really good job, I think, coming from kind of like an underdog position in the market, and they staked themselves out on having, retro bodies and supporting them. And Olympus just never was able to develop that kind of traction. And, Fuji, I don't think would be close at all to shipping the number of units that a Sony or a Canon sells, but they have their really dedicated niche audience, and that is potentially all you need to keep going.
Totally. All right. What about the topic of the day? Let's move on.
Yeah, let's move on. Yeah, so the topic of this today's show is our best and worst gear investments. I thought this would be fun because yeah, we get to look back at all the money that we've spent and what's worked out for us and what hasn't. In the money that we lost, exactly. So I'm happy to go first here. I'm gonna go worst and then end on best, and maybe we could just kind of go back and forth.
Sure.
Speaking of Fuji, now this is not to shit on Fuji. This is very personal, so I just want to get that out of the way. Speaking of a passionate fan base, I just want to get that out of the way right now. But for me, the Fuji X cameras were never a good investment, and I've owned 3 of them, a couple of them multiple times. And this is a case, so I started with the XE3, and this one I almost didn't put on the list because I did make some awesome images with the Fuji XT-3, and I was trying to get a digital companion to my Leica M6, but I couldn't afford a Leica M9 at the time, was the digital camera. And it was my first experience with Fuji, and one of their first, excuse me, I owned the XE1. So it was the first rangefinder style kind of consumer camera that they made. And this one was overall a pretty good investment. I ultimately just wanted a Leica, and so it didn't really match up to that, but it was good. But the main story with Fuji for me was that I kept trying to make it work, and it just isn't the right system for me. And there's a couple different reasons why. For photo work, I know that I prefer a larger sensor size, and the APS-C sensor really started to show, when I was using the Fuji to do the kind of work that I was doing at the time, which was a lot of event work for nonprofits. Where I started to see that really hold me back was the low light performance, especially compared to something like a Sony. And so that was the Fuji XT-2, and I just, shooting at 64 ISO, they just did not do well. And then also processing in Lightroom, there's this weird thing that happens with Fuji cameras where when you're looking at a highly detailed image, there's a way that Lightroom renders the detail that kind of looks like worms. I actually made a YouTube video on this a long time ago. It just gets this kind of fakey digital feeling, and it doesn't happen with Capture One. But at the time, I was using Lightroom, and I was really locked into Lightroom. And
so you were blaming Fuji. Poor Fuji.
Again, they make awesome cameras. It was just not the right camera for me. And then more recently with the XT3, I ran it, I was like, oh, this will be perfect. It's like lightweight, it's water resistant. And they have beautiful colors and whatnot. And I tried to use it for video, and the Fuji lenses they are designed for photo. They're not designed with video in mind. You can tell from the lens construction, the way they perform in video, both in terms of autofocus, but as well as when you're doing things like zooming, there can be some weird jittery effects or definitely a loss of focus. They're nowhere close to parafocal. And there were just kind of too many things that didn't work in the video mode. And with the Fuji system, you can adapt third-party glass, but it's not really a great experience. And they're really meant to be used with the Fuji X lineup of lenses. There's not a robust third-party lens ecosystem. So Fuji camera is awesome, but they've never been the right place for me to go, even though I want to make them that so hard.
With the XT3 processing the picture, did you have the same problem? Or maybe you weren't using Lightroom anymore?
I did have the problem with Lightroom. I switched to Capture One, and I didn't have that problem. I think it's the way that their sensor, they have the slightly different sensor. I forget exactly what they call it, the X-Trans sensor. And it uses a different configuration of the like RGB layout of the sensor. So instead has these little cells that are arranged differently and supposedly gives you a more organic or film-like look. But for whatever reason, that in combination with Lightroom is just a terrible combination. And I cannot recommend that.
I feel like when you're using Adobe product, it's like being in an abusive relationship. Everybody's telling you it's crap. You should get out of it. But you're like, no, but when it's sometimes we have a good time when it doesn't crash. It's really fun. And I know it's expensive, but I felt
it's like owning a Land
in
Rover,
an abusive relationship with Adobe Premiere for way too long, and I'm still using Lightroom, and Photoshop. So,
yep. Yeah, definitely. So yeah, Fuji cameras haven't worked out for me. For the right person, they're going to be amazing. If you use Capture One and you're mostly focused on photography and you're not really as concerned with video, or you're able to make the lenses work for whatever reason, I think they might work out better than you. But I ultimately ended up having to sell them all. And when you do that, you lose money. So not a great investment. Mike, what's your first worst pick?
Oh boy. So first of all, I would say cameras in general. It's a pain in the ass. It's a necessary evil. But one way or another, it's either you're just straight up losing money, or you're making money, but you're in this constant marathon where in your mind you're trying to keep track of, or at least I do, to be sure that you're charging enough, that you're including your camera because it's losing its value so quickly. So I personally constantly like keeping an eye on the market, like how much my camera costs, my camera package costs, how much I can rent it. And yeah, sometimes I lose a lot of money, and when I don't, I feel like it's always in my mind. And they depreciate very fast, very quickly. There is always something better. It's technology, right? But yeah, one of my big time loss was getting a Leica SL. And with the kit lens 24-90, which altogether with accessories was something close to $1,300. $13,000, sorry. $13,000, 30. Yep, and I ended up selling it for half the cost, so I took a hit. About like less than a year later, I sold it because I tried a lot to make it work. So the honeymoon phase first, then you're like, it's not gonna work. What am I gonna do? And of course, you pass the point to return it. So then you try to make it work. And then you realize it's not gonna work, and then eventually you just you sell it, you lose money, and you move on with your life. Yeah, Jen is commenting, I wish it was only 1,300. Yeah, I wish too.
Yeah,
but yeah, that being said,
wait,
I wanna say it's not that it's a bad camera. And I think that's the problem with cameras in general. I think it's because we are constantly evolving, and we are constantly trying to figure out what is the best for our personal needs. And our needs evolve too. Like what I was doing with production 3 years ago has nothing to do with what I'm doing now or where I want to be tomorrow. And of course, the gear evolve with that, and eventually you end up to a place completely different, or you want to go in a place totally different, and it doesn't make sense to keep the gear you have, or even if it does, it makes you feel like it's slowing you down, and you don't want to be slowed down by the equipment. At least I don't. And yeah, so yeah, you end up beautiful piece of equipment, beautiful piece of design. Looks great on the shelf, looks great on your desk with a MacBook Pro for an Instagram picture. For that kind of stuff, it is amazing. It is the perfect camera for your Instagram high-end photographer looking selfie. Shooting something like using now great glass, mostly great glass. I feel like Leica really makes some of the best lenses in the world. They are made for photography, but somehow they work great in video too. And I don't think it's weird because I don't think they designed them with that in mind. They just do. I mean, they have their M series completely adapted with like Cinemods, and they sell them with just with a photofocus ring and a matte box adapter in front. It's the same glass. They didn't redesign it. It's just because it's so good. So at least they were that. But yeah, it was taking just okay pictures. It had nothing standing out. The process is good, but nothing that you can't achieve with another brand as long as you shoot RAW. And the video was terrible, just straight up. Was probably like 3 stops of dynamic range in 8-bit 420, and yep.
Oof.
The promise of shooting 10 bits 422 externally, which was a big deal at the time. But the recorder sucks. Well, yeah, that was a total loss. I sold it, and at the time I got the Canon 1DX Mark II instead. And then soon after that they released the GH5, somewhere around. And that was another thing. I got the GH5 as a B cam almost randomly, and I was like, this camera only cost $2,000. That's better than anything else. This is horse crap.
I mean, for video, it's completely true that nothing compares to certainly when it came out. There's obviously a lot more competition in that space now. But yeah, so, well, first of all, I just want to go back to the fact that you said we're on a show called The Camera Show, and you just said all cameras are the worst investment.
Yes.
Just want to call that out there.
Yes. And it is. It's a necessary evil. You need one. You need, and they are amazing. Mm-hmm. But they do cost you a lot of money. It's always going to be the case. Yes. Always.
Yeah.
Unless, you stick with it 10 years, I don't know, with the same camera. I guess if you shoot film, you don't have this problem. But, if you shoot digital and you do video production, oh boy, what you just got into.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, if you shoot film, then you're just cursing the cost of purchasing film and development costs. That's where you run into the issue there. But you don't have to buy a new body very often.
Nope.
Or at this point ever, basically. So one quick question on the Leica SL. The photo quality was not mind-blowing? Because I have seen the Leica M10 and M9 before it. And paired with, great rangefinder glass, I do feel like there is something kind of special about that look. I still often find myself seeing a Leica photo, a photo from a Leica rangefinder camera, and really just being drawn to it. And then I find out that it's shot with a Leica, and that's often a confirmation for me when I'm not looking at the label first, and when I'm drawn into the image, and then I realize that's what it's shot with.
No, out of the box they have this processing of the colors and the image in general, the contrast, everything that just pairs perfectly with their lenses and their style. But it's nothing that you can't achieve. You could get, like, at the time that I had the SL, you could get any, I guess even like at the time, what was that? Probably in the S7 line. Was probably A7R2 probably at the time, something like that. You could get one of those bodies, put a Leica lens on it, because really, like, most of the job is from the lens, and because that's how, I mean, that's how to reproduce in post. But then you just, I mean, if you take a little bit of time to find where the differences are, you could get the same results, or at least very, 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 very close, and worth the investment. Outside of, and that's,
Yeah.
I guess that's not debatable because that's up to personal preference. Outside of the experience itself of using the camera, it is a nice piece of equipment. It's beautifully designed, very minimal. It's nice. Feels nice, but it's kind of like we just said about the Olympus lenses. There is something very frustrated about feeling something physically and then you shoot and it doesn't match, like the feel of it.
Yep. I definitely understand that. Well, I'm going to just keep my other worst investment to just one more item, and that is the DJI. This could just be drones, just period. But the one that I lost the most money on was the DJI Mavic Pro 2, which I sold for just a couple $100. I want drones to happen so bad, and the other day when I was out shooting some hiking stuff, I was like, oh man, a drone would be so cool. So there may be a future in which I get another drone. However, talk about abusive relationships. Up to this point, they have not paid off for me in any way. And I think it comes down to the fact that drones work so differently than all your other gear, because you have to be so conscious of what's around you. You have to be so conscious of the regulations. And it's not just, I need to know, some theoretical rules that once I learn them, I've learned them and now I can go do anything. You have to research the exact area in which you'll be flying them in, unless you're completely remote. But even so, you should be making sure, like if you're in a national park, you can't fly them at all. So you have to do so much work just to be able to safely and legally fly a drone, that they turned out to be a lot more overhead than I was expecting. And to this point, there's been a couple paid jobs where I've included some shots from a drone, and they were really awesome in those shots. But I thought, when I got a drone, I'm like, oh man, I'm just going to be out everywhere shooting these epic videos. And it's like, no, you can't fly here. Like all the places that you want to fly a drone, you probably can't fly a drone. That's my main experience.
Yeah. Well, first of all, I thought it could have been worse. You could have crashed it. That would have been a very bad investment. And I know I have a couple of friends that did that, so I thought that's what your story were gonna be. So that's not too bad, I guess, if you get some money back. But yeah, I got a couple of drones. I got the Phantom 4 Pro, which was the best. It was just very big, so to travel was hard. And I had the Mavic Air, the first one. And I would not say it was worth the money, but I had a lot of fun, so I would not consider them the worst investment. When I was shooting weddings, I would use them almost every time. But you're right, there is definitely like a lot of hassle that come with it. And in corporate and commercial, I never used it. Personal project, never either. To me, it's more that for my personal expectations, they don't necessarily match well enough with the cameras that I'm shooting with. And I wish it would be like almost the same quality. Like I wish I could fly a full frame, like shooting RAW or something. It doesn't, even if it's not a full frame, but even if it was just a let's say like the quality of a Pocket 4K, that would be in like a compact enough and cheap enough drone, I would be into that. And I think I would more likely make it work for commercial, and I would be more tempted to include it in production, just because I would know that the image is so capable. Most of the time I feel like they lack dynamic range. That's the biggest part, because everything else can be overcome, but dynamic range is a hard one when it gets like kind of all mushy, and it's hard.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm still hopeful that I will be able to make drones work for my, the kinds of videos that I want to shoot, but you're definitely right. I mean, the way that DJI is moving, it does seem like we might get there sooner than later as far as image quality. Uh, but you're definitely right. It is hard to match and kind of keep that level of consistency when you've got a client that you're trying to please and
Yeah.
and your own, of course, taste. What's next on your list, Mike?
I'm gonna go a little faster so we can move on to the best and leave the worst to the past. Very quick, very quick. Edelkrone sliders. They got me. I go. They got me with their commercials and fancy stuff. I was like, oh, that looks cool. That looks clever. And it is not. It just doesn't work well. That moment, it's just not smooth enough, or it requires a tons of practice that I haven't had, but I doubt that's what it is. And to me, a piece of equipment, if it requires way too much practice to make it work decent enough, that's not worth it for me.
Mm-hmm.
But I would say the main issues is when you pass that middle section where it's overlapping, it just breaks slightly, so it's very hard to do like a full smooth motion. And yeah, on top of that, there is little you can't put it on like 2 tripods, for example. So if your rig is a little heavy, even if the slider is rated to have like a payload, like crazy payload, like it's pretty good. But most of the time what happens is once it gets to an end, if your camera rig is too heavy, the tripods start to move. So, well, wasn't able to make it work, or to get rid of it, which make it a very bad investment because I still have it. So there is that. Outside of that, I would say not so much for the piece of equipment itself, but for the story that I'm about to tell. GorillaPod. So they're notoriously pretty bad. Everybody knows that. You almost like buy them knowing that it's gonna be as good as bad. And I had a lot of cases where it was very convenient to do like time lapses on the fly when you hike, put them around the tree, like that kind of stuff. Well, here's the story. 2 years ago, I had about 4 gigs back to back over 2 weeks. So I was doing a wedding on the weekend. Monday I was flying to Vegas for doing an event over multiple days. Then I was flying to Hawaii for a documentary for another week, and then I was flying back to California for another wedding, and then I'm flying back to Portland. So it was gonna be a crazy 2 weeks. I felt great, felt busy.
Yeah.
It was awesome.
Yeah.
But so I had to think my whole thing, like, my strategy for backup and recharging and everything. At the time I was shooting with GH5s, and so I brought 2 with me with speed booster and lenses, and so I had 1 tripod, and I decided to go with the GorillaPod for the second one. I was like, this small, carry on, blah blah blah. In Hawaii, so after the 3rd gig, 1 left, still 1 to go. Just before my flight, and I was running late, I had 1 more interview to shoot. Talent was late, was waiting for him to shoot the interview and catch my plane, go to California. Couldn't miss my plane, so I was like, a little bit of stress. We shoot the interview, and just as I about to leave, I grabbed the GorillaPod with the camera to go and put everything back in the backpack. As I grabbed the GorillaPod, the camera detached from it and fly over the room. And I can still see the thing in slow motion in my head. Fly over the room, crashes on the ground. Speed booster open like an Oreo cookie in half with like screws everywhere. Like this is this is very bad. I never dropped a camera before. I mean, like
Yeah.
a small drop that happened, but never like that. Like I felt very bad, and it was because so I don't have it on it, but there is like a little ball. How is it called again? Little ball head.
Ball head. Yeah.
Yeah, ball head. Thank you.
Yeah.
And yeah, it's a little flimsy. Even if you don't pay attention, you don't screw it hard enough, and on top, I mean, the whole ball head is a little flimsy. And if you screw it tight, you're good. But there is a solid chance that you don't, and that can happen. So for that reason, I consider it a very bad for that story. One of my worst equipment, because it cost me a speed booster. Everything else was fine. The camera was fine. The lenses was. The speed booster, rest in peace.
Mm.
That was
Well, props
mistake.
to the GH5 and the lens for holding up. I feel like if you've watched Casey Neistat's channel, you've seen a GorillaPod destroy at least like 5 Canon 70Ds or 80Ds or whatever he's shooting with, and
Yep.
I feel like he put GorillaPod on the map, but at the same time, how many times have you seen him like go to the camera store and buy a new camera because he wrecked it because the GorillaPod fell over?
I was gonna say it's probably the reason why I knew it was bad, and it's probably the reason why I wanted one. Probably both because of Casey Neistat. Probably.
Yep. Definitely. Yeah.
So yeah,
Canon
that was
appreciative for that.
Yep, that was my worst. I had a few more. I have a lot of worst investment. I thought about, speaking of camera, very quickly, and we can later in another episode we can circle back to that topic. But there were definitely I got the Impossible i1, the little Polaroid camera. It was an experimental camera and it was terrible. I got one, very expensive for what it was. Never worked. Yeah, stuff like that. How about the good ones? Let's talk about the best investment.
Talk about the best investments. Well, these are all on here very specifically, and unfortunately, I don't own any of these cameras anymore. I really wish this first one on the list that I still had it, and that is the Leica M6. And this camera is on here just because I feel like, they tell you it's not about the gear, and in large part, I agree it's not about the gear, but at the same time, sometimes it's about the gear. And for whatever reason, I think there's a combination of reasons, but the photos that I have taken with the Leica M6 are by far my favorite photos that I have ever taken with any camera. And part of it is the experience. You have it in your hands and it's super dense and beautiful, and you click and it's so satisfying. But at the same, I think that there is something that happens psychologically when you're using a camera that you love, and that could be any camera. For me, the Leica M6 certainly was that. That you're psychologically just more invested. You're doing the thing that you want to be doing with that camera, and that's definitely the Leica M6 for me. I do also think that there's something to be said for the way rangefinders work, where you can see outside of the actual frame, and I think having that little bit of window into the world outside of the actual frame that you're going to shoot really is helpful in understanding. It makes you consciously think about the way that you're only selecting this little portion of the frame, and there's all this world around it, and being conscious of that while you're framing gets you to consider, is this the best frame, or do I maybe want to include that element? It's a helpful tool. So there is something, obviously that's all rangefinders, not just the M6. And certainly the Leica glass and the Zeiss glass that I, in some cases, preferred to the Leica glass was obviously that, that is just about the gear. There's just something about, beautifully well-produced glass that is going to reproduce an image better. And there's something, objective or more objective about that potentially. But I did sell this camera for the thing that's next on my list, and although it made sense at the time and allowed me to do more things with it, this was the camera that got me kind of most invested and most excited about photography, and just for that reason alone, I think it was a good investment.
Yeah, no, that's same. I had Leica M6 too in the past, and Yeah, what a great camera. It's just at the time I was shooting medium format and I wanted an alternative, but I didn't really like 35 millimeter, and that was to me the closest alternative to medium format, just because of the quality, the overall quality of the image you could get off it. And I don't know, like when you nail exposure in those cameras, it's just so good. And you're
Yep.
right, there is something about, and yeah, that's right, it's rangefinder in general, but there is really something magical about shooting rangefinder. I love that it doesn't, I mean, especially at the time mirrorless wasn't a thing. Just the option to not have the mirror going in front of your viewfinder while taking the picture, so you still see your scene while taking the picture, that's something. Definitely that makes the overall experience better. I don't know, it's quick. It's like you feel like a ninja. Like that really what
Yep.
got me into shooting street photography, because I was shooting street photography with my Hasselblad, and it was super obnoxious. Being a
Yeah.
ninja is
Huge and
not
heavy.
possible with that thing. It's you sneak behind someone, and you're like all quiet, and you frame and papa. It's that's that's how you sound like. Um, but yeah, Leica M6, great camera. How about the next one for you?
Yeah. So what I sold my Leica for was the Sony A7 III, and this was not a great sale in terms of emotional investment, but the Sony A7 III was how I started making money through photography, and it was how I was able to build a portfolio enough where I got a job. I wasn't a photographer. I was a photographer in combination with other marketing activities and social media and whatnot, but I was still getting paid to use my photography skills, and it was definitely from the body of work that I had built up with the Sony A7 III that allowed me to do that. And it was kind of like, it was, at the time, and still is, it was, or excuse me, the one that enabled this was the A7 II. I then later bought the A7 III, but the A7 II at the time was kind of the first time full frame had become really mass market. The Sony A7 was also that, but it was not a very refined product. It was almost like a beta test of a camera. And the A7 II took it a lot farther. And just in terms of being able to have a body of work that I was able to build up with image quality that could compete with much more expensive cameras, the A7 II deserves a pretty hearty recommendation for one of my best investments. How about you? What's on your...
You did some video work too with the A7 III, right?
With the A7 III, the A7 II was terrible for video. There was
Oh, sorry,
this
A7 II. I
interlacing.
don't know why I read 7 III. I just assumed that.
No, that's what I originally.
My bad, because you had the
I
A7
was
III
thinking
too,
of-
right?
I had that later, and that was not quite as good of an investment. I tried to make the A7 III work, but honestly, the dynamic range and the bit depth on the A7 III wasn't robust enough for video. But for photo, it was incredible. But the camera that kind of got me started was the A7 II. That was my first full frame digital camera, and definitely took my photography up a notch.
Nice. Yeah, sorry, I missed that. I don't know why I read A7 III. So when was the A7 II? What year was that?
It was like 2013, 2014. So yeah, it was right as full frame digital. I mean, certainly there was already the probably Canon 5D Mark III, but that was like a $3,500 camera at the very least. And this was, $2,000 with the kit lens. It was probably like 2,300 or something like that.
Yeah.
And I used the kit lens, not a very good lens, but
yeah. No, I remember looking at these. At the time, I was shooting with 5Ds, but I was already invested in Canon, and changing the whole system was not an option at the time. I was not making enough money. So I wonder if it was when they released the 5D Mark III, around like this period. because I kind of remember browsing around and looking at this camera before buying the Mark III. Cool. Yeah, on my end, no cameras. Sorry about the best investment. I try to focus on the stuff that I have been that I bought either like I bought a long time ago and I feel like I'm gonna have them forever, or like something like that. Something that I feel like was like I'm gonna, as long as I'm making content, I'm gonna keep it. I'm gonna go first with the Sennheiser MKH416, which is the mic I'm using right now to record. I got this mic about 2 years ago, I think. And I remember at first when I pulled the trigger, I was like, oh, I don't know, $1,000 in audio equipment. I don't know, it feels like, I don't know if it's a good idea. I mean, I felt confident about investing in audio, but I didn't measure like for how long I would keep that, because the thing is with audio, it's like we were saying earlier with film cameras, like it's not going anywhere. Like audio is it just works. So I mean, now you can see like on recorders there is a little bit of evolution, but for the most part, good equipment is there to stay. So yeah, that is definitely a good one. I've been carrying this mic around for everything. Every job, every personal project. I don't think there is a single video I've made that I haven't used this mic since then. So I think it's a great investment in that regard. And after that, I'm gonna go with the Aputure 120D. And for me, that was this particular light, but I would say any light that you feel confident with that works. Before that, when I was doing photography, was Profoto strobes, and I had the same feeling about it. Obviously, I sold it because I stopped doing commercial photography, but same thing, I could have kept that thing forever, and I feel the same way with the 120D. It's the one light I could carry around. Same thing, everything that I needed a light since I got it, I've been using it every job. Key light on interview, even at weddings. I use it with a Fresnel, like dance party and stuff like that. Like every uses, all short films that we've done, every gigs. Yeah, great light. Something like that. Yeah, and sorry, you want to say something about it?
Oh yeah. No, I just think it's a great point here, and I was definitely, in putting together my list, I was definitely trying to think of things that weren't cameras, because I totally agree with you that I think cameras are, if you're looking at resale value or things that are going to be changing the most in your kit, cameras are absolutely the worst investment. And so it is good advice that invest in lenses, invest in lighting, invest in audio, and I absolutely think that the dollar amount that you put into assuming you can get a decent camera, the investment that you put into your audio and your lighting are going to far out raise your production level rather than that next camera jump.
Yeah, totally,
no question.
Yeah, and same thing when I was looking at the list, and obviously there is cameras that I feel like it was a great investment too. Don't get me wrong. I was just like looking overall, what is like if I had to keep 3 pieces of equipment that are really like the ultimate best investment I personally did, was not a camera, but GH5, definitely a great investment. I get it when it was released, and I sold it not so long ago. And now I regret that I didn't keep at least one, because I had 2, and a GH5S. And still now I could use it for Bcam or for BTS pictures and stuff like that. So there is cameras that are great investment, all things considered. It's just that overall production or even if you do professional photography, it is not. And lenses, same thing. I was looking definitely on my lenses, the Sigma 18-35 so far has been my favorite overall. But as soon as you evolve to a different system, you have to switch lenses too most of the time. For me, Canon mount lenses have been a good bet, but I still have like traded a few to find like what works best for me. And I also try not to keep too much equipment at the same time. I like to try to keep my package a little small. Often it's also all I can afford to be realistic too.
Combination, yeah.
There is that, definitely. But so that's the reason. But yeah, definitely lenses is definitely on the best side too. And yeah, I'm gonna conclude for my list, and I know you have one more to go. Reflectors in general. I've started to get reflectors pretty early on, like a very simple round, like I don't know the sizes, maybe 3 feet, I don't know, 4 feet, I don't know, like the round ones, collapsible. There's multifunction ones. At least I would say black and white are the best, are definitely the ones that I use the most. But I have one that is multifunction that also do diffusion. That thing, I use it all the time. I always end up having like, even if I have a little bit more grip equipment and everything, I always end up using these because they are easy. You just like pop them in 2 seconds. They're light. And same thing, photography or filmmaking, you can use them all the time. I have a lot of round ones. I have 2 that I actually just got back from France. My parents sent it to me. It's like the last piece of equipment that I had left in France, and they are big 4x6, white and black, with stands, and they are collapsible the same way. And yeah, they're great. I can't wait to use them on a job. And the last one, I have it right here, and that's the most odd one. And it's probably by far the one that I use the most, and it's just a gray and white card. And I use this all the time because I have a passport, a color checker, whatever. I have it here too. I have the small one because I don't like to carry the big one. But often, if you're too far from the talent, it's hard because it's too small. So it's hard to use it on DaVinci Resolve, and if you use it for the gray card, same thing. It's kind of small. It's hard to see on the waveform. And if you're not in a close-up, it's hard to use them. And if you're a little far and you want to get them like closer to the camera, your exposure might change. So then that kind of defy the purpose. So I still use these, but not as much as this guy. This guy uses all the time. Because they are big, they are easy to spot on the waveform, especially when you're half blind like me, and on the go, running around like a crazy person. And often I'm getting lazy. I only use the gray card side because I can use just this little white part for the white balance. So that's one of my tricks.
Oh wow.
So I use that almost every jobs. Every time I can.
Wow,
everywhere. Nice. Yep. Can have back pocket in your backpack. And same thing, I had this thing in like maybe 10 years ago, and I still use it. I remember they almost like, they pushed the sell on me at the time, I remember. They were like, oh, what, you're shooting digital? You need a gray card. This bad boy, this is the best. Dude, the store doesn't even exist anymore. The guy's retired. It was probably like, this idiot, I sold another of those gray card chart and never gonna use it. Well, joke's on you, Michel, or whatever your name is, Jean-François, joke's on you. Because to these days, still use it. Best investment ever.
Yeah, those really proved their value to me when I was doing product photography, and it was just an incredibly difficult project or object to photograph, where the slightest shifts in white balance would not only make the photo much harder to edit in post, but could potentially be misleading for the product.
Yeah, that's
because it was it was a brown. I mean, they were small notebooks, and the specific kind of brown that the cover was. It was really important to get right, and also really, really challenging for white balance to show up accurately if you're using auto. So once I was able to start incorporating those, it changed my life. I was like, it saved me so much time in post production. It's crazy.
Yeah, you can't use your orange and teal LUT that you get from your favorite YouTuber on pictures like that. You can't.
Nope.
Yeah.
Nope.
I mean, you can, but you're never going to work with this client again.
Yeah, it was one of those combinations that with product stuff, I think this is often the case where you have to make it look as good as it can possibly look, but at the same time, it has to be true to life, because when people get it, they're, especially the audience who this was for, where it was like designers, they have a very specific need in mind, and if you misrepresent it, then you could get yourself in pretty big trouble. So
yeah. Or at the very least,
those I definitely back up.
Or at the very least, you're going to launch another debate of what is the color of the dress on Facebook, stuff like that.
Yeah.
Do you remember this? Where you like,
oh yeah,
God damn it, the white balance shitty. That's it. Stop arguing.
Yeah, no, that's a classic. I kind of love those things because it's kind of like or the one that was Yanni versus Laurel.
Yep.
Did you hear that one? It was an audio one that could sound both ways.
Yep.
Mind blowing. Well, I'll round out our best and worst.
You have one best, no? One more best, yeah?
Yeah, one more. So I am going to finish out with the Blackmagic Pocket Cinema Camera 4K.
You made me buy one.
Which is, yeah, I did. And I ended up selling this after not using it for terribly long because my use case changed from trying to pursue client work to shooting more of my own personal videos. And like I mentioned before, I really need weather sealing, which this camera has absolutely none of. But the reason that I want to include this camera is because it showed me what working with a cinema camera is like. Mm-hmm. I later used the Canon C300 line, so I got more experience with that kind of camera. But honestly, if I were going to pick up a camera, I would, price aside, I would probably pick the Pocket over the C300 in a lot of use cases, just because I love the image quality so much. But things like Blackmagic RAW, being able to use, you can use XLR mics with the XLR adapter, and just the seeing actual, 12-bit color with Blackmagic RAW and seeing what that looks like when you're actually color grading it. Honestly, for the fact that I had to switch to DaVinci Resolve alone, probably made purchasing this camera worth it, because I really love using DaVinci Resolve, and I do color work now freelance, and that has basically paid for the camera, more than paid for the camera itself. So just switching to Resolve alone, but it was such an educational camera where I learned so many new things about operating that style of camera, about just more in-depth video outside of the more typical consumer, compressed video. You're using a photo camera and just shooting it in video mode kind of way of doing things to something that is specifically made for video.
No, I agree. It's I was gonna say cameras like that just pushes you to be more intentional with your filming, which obviously it's kind of like slowing you down depending of what you're trying to film. If you're trying to do documentary, it's a little hard, but same. I love that. I personally, there are two things that were kind of deal breaker to me, at least for what I was doing at the time, was the battery life, because you just have to rig it so hard to make it work. There were that, and I would say IR cut was kind of a pain in the butt for me, because at the time I was doing a lot of stuff outside, and every time you throw an ND, like you just have to stack four filters on top of each other to be able to have like a decent image. Just there were too many things to think about, to keep in mind, to not mess up your image. There were other things, but they were more like user error. Sorry. From my end, it was not the camera, but I had a hard time with the dual native ISO. Because I don't know if you remember, like whatever you pick, you're stuck with it. In post, you can't jump from one ISO section to the other. So if you slightly underexpose, you're underexposed, but that's user error. You gotta know your gear. Stuff like that. There were, at the time, I remember I was a little annoyed by having to shoot with external SSD, but that's just being cheap, because really you can get CFast cards and just shoot CFast cards. That's probably what I would do now. At the time I was like, CFast cards is too expensive, never gonna buy them. Well, look at that.
Yeah.
Just buy the cards. Just buy the cards. Just don't try to, like camera is cheap already. Like, put your money on the stuff, on the right stuff.
I almost put in my best investment pair of Angelbird 128 gigabyte SD cards, and that's actually what I used with the Blackmagic Pocket, because they were able to record at the full bit rate.
Oh, really?
They're fast enough. Yeah.
I thought you were limited.
Of course, now they're.
Yeah, I thought you were limited at like 12:1 or something like that.
No, they shot the full range of.
Nice.
I mean, they're very expensive SD cards for sure, but I can use them. Recording anything that will record to an SD card, I can record with those, and they've been 100% flawless so far. So I mean, there's nothing worse than having your footage ruined by something stupid, and cheaping out on SD cards can definitely be one of those things. As far as your kind of niggles with the cameras, I definitely think that all of those downsides are definitely true. And for me, I was able to deal with them for the most part, except for the battery life. I think that one is just I don't know what they can do, whether it would be bigger. Just using like the Sony like medium-sized batteries in the body directly, something. But the battery life is kind of unforgivable. Everything else for my work I was able to work with it, but I definitely agree that all of those issues were there.
I feel like, to me, with the type of work I do, I need a camera, the battery to shoot at least 2 hours. That's the minimum. Yeah. I can't swap batteries more than every 2 hours. I can't. It just takes over the whole workflow. And putting a V mount or a gold mount just defy the purpose of having a compact camera. And again, you add cables and blah blah blah. It's like more stuff and more money too. So defy also the having a cheap camera too.
Yeah, and the other thing that you're if you're getting into that rigging up, you often get into very camera specific stuff, and when you're looking at investment, it's very hard to get your money back out of something like that. So if you're spending it on things that are a little bit more universal, it's much more likely that will have a resale value at the if you need to shift focus or move on from that. And when you're getting camera specific stuff like cages, it just doesn't hold up well, because a new camera comes out, or you don't really need that particular one cable that cost you $50 or whatever. It just starts to not make sense. So definitely agree with you there.
All right, well, I suggest to conclude with our recommendation, just because I'm getting late. I'm gonna miss my my appointment. I have an appointment at 5 in 10 minutes, so we gotta wrap it up. I'm sorry.
Let's let's get out of here, man. So I'll really quick recommendation here. This is linked in the show notes, as will all our recommendations and top news topics that will be linked above. So building a custom camera. This is really cool. This is using a Raspberry Pi camera. They just released a camera kit for the Raspberry Pi.
Oh, nice.
So you can build your own digital camera now with this kit from And the recommendation that I have in here is someone from The Verge actually going in and doing it.
Nice.
Definitely a little bit of coding in Python required, but in the camera kit that you buy from Raspberry Pi, they do have the general code that you need to use. It does look like you need to supplement it with some homebrew stuff that there will be troubleshooting if you go this route, but I mean, you're building a camera to build a camera, right? That's part of the experience.
Yeah, I actually I made one Raspberry Pi into a retro gaming station, which is probably one of the easiest one to do, and I still have it. So I wonder if it's the same version, if I can reuse the parts, because I'll be into that. Cool.
Yeah, it looked like a super fun project. Definitely something I'm considering.
Nice. Yeah, I was looking at drones that you can make with Raspberry Pi too. So maybe you can do a camera drone. We'll see. Well,
what's your recommendation?
Yeah, my recommendation this week is the YouTube channel Media Division. I forgot where they are from. They are in Europe. I'm always very bad with that. I think they're German. They are so good. They make very well produced videos. Like nerding hard into a topic usually. So it can be a lens, it can be a camera, a sensor size. So yeah, I highly recommend to go watch, grab a beer, and it's 20, 30. I think they even have like 40 minutes videos, but they are really well produced, very interesting. If you want to nerd out on gear, that is definitely a good one.
Yeah, for sure. No, I love that they are just they don't give a shit about typical YouTube stuff, which is, kind of clickbaity or topic focused or even just limited to a certain genre. They just have whatever they're interested and they go super, super deep, as complex and niche as you could possibly want to go, like their 46-minute on context Zeiss lenses, which is absolutely awesome.
It's so good.
Made me pick up a couple of context lenses. Yeah.
Yeah, they reproduce scenes of The Shining, where I just incrust himself in the shot. They're awesome. I love their episode where they compare sensor size. They emulate medium format cameras to compare with full frame and micro four third, etc. But yeah, highly recommend. It's very good.
Yeah, great recommendation. Well, that's going to be it for the show. Thanks for joining us. Mike, if people want to check out more of your work, where can they find you at?
The other Mike Morris, because we are way too many. theothermikemorris.com. Simplest way to find me. Mike. Yeah, from there, there's all the links everywhere. How about you? Where can we find you?
Well, you can. Not too many other Rowan Bradleys are there. There are a couple. So if you're interested in checking out what I'm up to and some of my work, go to rowanbradley.com. Of course, links for everything that we talked about today will be in the show notes, linked below. We would genuinely love to hear your thoughts on any of the topics that we discussed today. So let us know in the comments. And if you want to tune in next time, give us a subscribe, and we'll see you next week.
Cheers.
Adios.